Okay, this is a 2005 Chevy Cobalt. Front pads and rotors, yeah, these are really rusty. This car's been sitting for a couple of years. Lady across the street, her daughter, first car, just wants some brakes on this thing, go get it safetied. And like I said, it's been sitting, so these are all rotted up. Tire off, tires underneath the car, just in case anything falls. Jack stands, wheel chuck underneath the rear tire. And before I do anything, I'm gonna make sure this disc is loose. This is going, so who cares? There we go. See, it's loose, it's rattling around in there. Okay, and now we're gonna remove the caliper, the piston portion of the caliper body, not the mount, the caliper body. That is a 13 millimeter. Two 13 millimeter bolts, top and bottom. Right there and right there. Wow, rusty. Okay. You see the socket on the one. Oops, there you go. Socket on this one, and the other bolt is right there. They have little bellows on the back of them. So we're going to take those two bolts off and back in a sec. Okay, bit of a brain fart. Those are not 13 millimeters, they're 14 millimeters, sorry. Working on something else a few minutes ago that was 13 millimeters. They're loose. I'm just taking the two bolts out. We're going to be putting Loctite on these before we put them back in. A lot of times they're really tight, so you're going to have to pry them off. Sometimes you even have to hammer them off, especially if there's a lip here on the rotor. Okay. Wow, rusty. Might as well do this before we go any further, and that is compress the piston which pushes on the pads. It has to be pushed back into its bore. You can buy a piston compressing tool. It's this old, nasty, bent up C-clamp will do the same thing. Just make sure you're not clamping onto the line or anything. You're clamping front and back onto something solid. This bolt on top of the brake line is fine. And I'm just going to wind the clamp in as it pushes the piston in until it goes flush. You can do this with a large pair of channel lock pliers, vice grips. This is just the easiest way I've always found to do it. And you can see the piston pushing back. Don't crank it back in there, just push it back until it stops moving, and it's nice and flush with the front. Also check the boots around the piston for any cracks. If there's cracks, you're going to have to replace the piston boot or replace the caliper, one of the two. You can rebuild them and put a new boot on there, but a lot of people just buy the calipers. Depends on the price of the caliper. And now we have to get the pads off, and they're probably going to be, again, for as long as it's sat there, they're probably going to be pretty stuck in there. And since we don't care about the pads or the rotors, tap on them a bit to loosen them up, and then pry them out with a screwdriver. And on these cars, they just come straight out. They're just two little ears, two little slots. Here's a new pad. They have these two little ears. They go in little slots there and there. Same on the back. And they just come straight out, but they're just sticky from being rusty. And the phone's ringing. Back in a second. Okay. Old pads are popped out. They were a little sticky, took a few seconds to pry them out. The caliper is now hanging up on. Don't ever hang it by the brake line. The brake caliper is now up here. It's just hooked over top of the coil spring for the front strut. And now these two bellows, these allow the caliper, once it pushes in, these will pull the caliper back away. And these are sticky. These should not be sticky. And on most of them, like on this one, you simply want to pull them out. Make sure not to wreck the boot. Make sure the boot comes, usually it comes off from one side. The boot may come off for the inner or outer, sometimes both. This one, it separates from the outside. Do one pin at a time, because a lot of times pins are different top to bottom. They might be a different length, different size. You don't want to screw them up. So I'm going to pull the top one out. And I have a nasty greasy pin. I'm going to clean that off, spray some cleaner and degreaser inside that hole that goes back up into here, and clean that out, and then put new grease on, and we'll put it back on. Do the same for the bottom. Let's just see if the bottom and top pins are the same. Yep, pins are the same. So no big deal getting those mixed up. So like I said, these should move freely in and out. So I'm going to clean everything up, get the old grease out of there, re-grease these with, I'm going to use a Loctite anti-seize. This comes in copper, silver. You can use synthetic grease. You can use brake synthetic grease. Tons of different stuff you can use. I'm going to be using this. So I will get these all cleaned out, clean these off, new grease, pop them back in. We'll be back in a minute. Okay, so cleaned off pin, re-greased with the Loctite. Put it in, push till the boot pops over top of the lip, and then check that, make sure these go in and out properly. Just move in and out nice and easy. If you put too much grease in there, you can hydro-lock them. They won't push in this way, and they will push out. So don't over-grease them. I'm just going to get that grease flowing in there. Make sure these move nice and easy. This one's a little sticky. I'm going to work on this one a little bit more. It's not the way I want. So I'll get that out again, clean it up again, and then put it back in. If your pin shafts are a little bit rusty, you can polish them, sand polish them. If they're really, really pitted, I don't recommend it. Replace the pins. But if they're just a little tiny bit rusty, a little tiny bit crappy, polish them up with like a 600-800 grit wet and dry sandpaper. You can use a fine steel wool. Just make them nice and polished and smooth. Put some grease on them, and as long as they move back and forth in there really nice and easily, then you're good. So I'm going to get this one freed up a little bit. Be back in a minute. Okay, now that I've got that re-greased up the way I want it, it's moving in there nice and easy. There's two bolts that hold the caliper to the axle frame, or to the spindle. There's one here and one here. They are 15 millimeters. Make sure I got that right this time. Yeah, it's a 15. Yes, 15 millimeter. So 15, and then the pins up there were 14s. So two 15s, take these two bolts out, and this whole thing will come off, and then we'll clean it up a little bit and get ready for the new pads. Back in a sec. Okay, so the caliper, main caliper mount is off, and these spring clips here that hold the pads in, I'm going to clean these up with a wire wheel on a drill. Wire wheel. Just going to go in there and, clean all these ones out. I checked them. Usually they don't come with the brake kit. If you need them, reorder them. If they're rusty and dead, these ones were stainless. So I'm just going to clean these up and make sure everything is nice on there. And because if you don't clean them up, they'll get crud in those little grooves where the pads go in, and the pads will get sticky. So we will clean those up, make sure everything can slide in there nicely, and be back in a sec. All cleaned up now, and we're ready to bolt this back on. and it goes this way. The little pins, the little slider pins, face inward. And I'm going to bolt this back on with the 2 bolts that came off. I will put the torque specs in. I'll put a little, what do you call them? A little thought balloon. I brain fart. I'm going to put one up here with the torque specs in it on these bolts and the 2 main ones, which I have to go look up in my manual right now. So I'm going to put these on blue Loctite on both bolts, tighten them up to the proper torque spec, which I will list in an annotation. That's it. Annotation up here, and be back. Whoa, got ahead of myself. That needs to go. Ha. Okay. So I'm going to take the wire wheel and clean up here on the hub where the brake disc meets so that this is nice and flush against there, and I'm going to put the same Loctite anti-corrosion, anti-seize stuff on top of there so that the brake doesn't rust on there, and so no rust gets in there and it doesn't get stuck again. So I'm going to clean all this up with a wire wheel and wire brush and stuff and be back. Oh, and charge my frickin' camera apparently. Yeah, so about 15 minutes. Okay, while my camera is charging, I put the caliper, or sorry, the brake rotor on. A little bit of the anti-seize behind the brake rotor so it doesn't stick to the hub or the spindle. Washed off the packing grease that is on every brake rotor with brake cleaner. Just spray it on there, wipe it off, brake cleaner. Try to use the non-chlorinated stuff. I hate the chlorinated stuff. It's bad. And I mounted the caliper mount. So it's on there, but it's not torqued. Blue Loctite on the bolts, Loctite blue, not red. Red means you have to use heat to take them off. Blue will just keep them from vibrating off. Don't ever oil your nuts or bolts before you put them in. Clean them with a wire wheel, and then Loctite them, put them in. No oil. That means it'll help vibrate them off. And I've got my torque wrench set. I checked the specs. They are 85 foot-pounds for the big 15mm bolts in the back. These ones will be 25 foot-pounds. 85 foot-pounds, 25 foot-pounds. So I'm just going to tighten them up. Trying to stay out of your way. That's the bottom one. Oh, the top one's a little harder to get on. From the other side. Full snowsuit mode here because it's around 0 today. Celsius. Maybe a degree or 2 above. This keeps slipping off. I need to get an extension so I can get back on this thing. Just the bolt is too close to the upper arm here, and I can't get the head of my torque wrench in there properly. Okay, so I'm just using an extension on this to bring it out so I can torque it from back here. Anyway, 85 foot-pounds. I'll finish that up, and then we'll come back and put the pads on. See the bolts here and there. Okay. Oops, sorry. Camera, stay. Okay, the back brake pad is in. I'm going to put the front one on, and I put the tiniest little whiff of the anti-seize on the 2 ears of the brake pad. Don't get it on the face of the brake pad. Slide it into those 2 little slots. Pop it on. Now I'm going to take some disc brake anti-squeal. There are anti-squeal pads on there. This is when you hit your brakes and the tires squeal. It's from vibration. This will keep vibration from coming between the caliper and the brake pad. And this is not smeared on like window caulking. It's like a light skin of it. Just where the caliper fingers, the two fingers on the caliper are going to touch the pads. And then on the inside, I've already put the inner pad on, where the circle of the piston is going to touch. And it's just a light coat, like a light skin of it. Again, you can see it's barely visible. Now I'm going to take the caliper, place it on, and on the Cobalt, the little slider pins, there's a flat side that goes against the middle, the center there, to keep that pin from spinning when you tighten it. Same on the bottom. There we go. Line those up. The two bolts that hold those on, the tiniest bit of blue Loctite. Again, Loctite is not something you don't apply it like ketchup on French fries. I'm using the gel. Tiny little bit on the end, and as it goes in, it will distribute that among the threads. And these two 14mm bolts will be tightened to 25 foot-pounds, 22 to 26. So I'll set my torque wrench for that. Which is almost nothing. 26. Sorry, I'm in your way again. It's very hard to do this stuff without getting in the camera's way, honestly. Okay. Again, that's blue Loctite, not red. Red will need heat to get off. You'll never get them off without using a torch. So now, a little bit of brake cleaner to clean any dirty fingerprints off and grease that I may have gotten on there. And spray the front and back, let that drip off. There's a bit more. Oh, that's dust. Fluff. And then I'm going to go press the brake pedal and push it'll push the pads toward the rotor, and then check your brake fluid reservoir, because once you've pushed that piston back, all that fluid has gone somewhere. It's gone up the line and usually into the brake fluid reservoir, and it could be overfilled. If it's overfilled, use a turkey baster, something, suck it out. You can take a cloth, as long as it's like, I hate doing this, but if you take something that's not going to leave little fibers and stuff behind, you can dip it in the brake fluid reservoir and let it wick out, let it suck the fluid out. I've done that before. All kinds of, just get the fluid out of there. A turkey baster is perfect. They're like $1 at a dollar store. Keep one in your garage, or steal your wife's and tell her you don't know where it went. Sorry for the sniffles. Anyway, that's about it. Again, 25 foot-pounds for these two bolts, and 85 foot-pounds for the two main ones that hold the caliper body, or the caliper frame, onto the spindle. And that's it. Thanks for watching.